Welcome back, everybody. We know you guys love to get into the nitty-gritty, so let's dive right in. The New York Jets. Big changes at the top, and yeah, we're talking a total leadership overhaul. Big implications here. We're going to unpack it all, see if this really is the turning point for a franchise that's, well, let's face it, been stuck in a rut for a while. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to break it all down with us.
It's definitely a situation worth watching. High risk, high reward. Could go either way.
For sure. And they kick things off with a really unconventional move. They hired their coach, Aaron Glenn, before they even had a GM. Total opposite of the usual NFL playbook, right? Usually the GM is calling the shots on the coaching search. What's your take on that?
I think it tells you a lot about what the Jets are focused on. They clearly had a very strong idea of the kind of leadership they wanted for the team, on the field, in the locker room. So much so that they locked in the coach before figuring out who'd be building the roster. Seems like a big vote of confidence in Glenn's ability to shape the team's culture.
And then they bring in Darren Mougey to build around Glenn.
Yeah.
Pretty young guy, no prior experience as a GM.
Yeah, Mougey's only 39, actually. He's a couple years younger than their quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. He was with the Denver Broncos before this, assistant GM there. But this is a huge step up. The Jets are basically banking on his potential, fresh perspective, and his ability to learn quickly in a high-pressure situation.
It's a gamble, no doubt. But his time in Denver, he saw the highs and the lows.
Yeah.
Super Bowl 50 win, then the struggles, the whole Russell Wilson trade, a lot to learn from.
Absolutely. That experience could be huge for Mougey. He's seen what it takes to build a championship team, but also seen how even big, bold moves can backfire. That kind of balanced experience is rare for someone his age, and it could give him a real edge navigating the Jets situation, which, let's be honest, is complicated.
Complicated is putting it mildly. 14 years without a playoff appearance, longest drought in franchise history. That's a lot to overcome.
It is, and it's not just the playoffs, right? There's this feeling that the team's just dysfunctional, and that needs to change. The culture needs a serious reset. Mougey's job goes way beyond just getting talent. He's got to rebuild the foundation of the franchise.
And then there's the Aaron Rodgers question hanging over everything. His future with the team is up in the air, and how Mougey handles that could make or break his time in New York.
Rodgers is the big unknown here. If he stays, Mougey's got to build around him, go for a Super Bowl run, tough decisions about the roster, the salary cap. If Rodgers gets traded, that means a rebuild, and Mougey needs to find a new quarterback. Either way, the pressure is on.
And he's doing it all with limited resources. 7th overall pick in the draft, not exactly a guarantee of a franchise-changing player.
Definitely makes things harder. And they're tight on cap space, too, about $25 million. Not a lot of room to make big moves, especially with some key players hitting free agency. Mougey's going to have to be creative and strategic to build a competitive roster with what he's got.
Let's talk about that Denver experience a little more. You mentioned their drafting record has been impressive lately.
Yeah, worth pointing out, they've drafted 4 all-pro players in the last 3 drafts. Guys like Pat Surtain II, Quinn Miners. Those picks, especially Miners, who was a 3rd-rounder, they show that Mougey has an eye for talent, especially finding value in the later rounds. That's going to be huge for the Jets with their limited draft capital.
So, okay, he can spot talent, but can he manage a roster effectively, especially under a tight salary cap?
That's the million-dollar question right there. The NFL, it's a salary cap league, and making it all work within those limits, that's crucial for a GM. Mougey's going to have to find value in free agency, make tough calls about who to re-sign, maybe restructure some contracts to free up space. It's a balancing act for sure. It's a tough job, no doubt about it. And then you add in the New York media, the fans, that's a whole other level of pressure. Mougey's going to need thick skin, that's for sure. How he handles all that, it's just as important as knowing how to evaluate players.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the coach, Aaron Glenn. First time as a head coach, but he's got tons of experience as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, his background on defense, that's a huge asset. Spent years as a defensive coordinator, most recently with the Saints. He's got a reputation for developing players, instilling discipline. He builds defenses that are aggressive, fundamentally sound. The Jets, they've been struggling on defense for years. Glenn could really turn things around there.
He's got a connection to Sean Payton too, right? The new head coach over in Denver.
That's right. They work together in New Orleans. And from what I hear, they've got a good relationship that could be really valuable for Mougey, especially in his first year. Having that link to Payton, an offensive mind like that who knows Glenn's style, that's a big plus.
It's an interesting dynamic for sure. So we've got a relatively inexperienced GM, a first-time head coach, both tasked with turning around a franchise that's been stuck in mediocrity, and they're doing it in the biggest, most intense media market in the country. Pretty bold move for the Jets, wouldn't you say?
Bold's one way to put it. High risk, high reward, that's for sure. It's got everyone in the league talking. The big question is, can this approach, this bet on youth and potential, can it finally break the cycle of disappointment that's plagued the Jets for so long?
A question we'll be asking all offseason long. But let's talk expectations. Year 1, new regime. What are some realistic goals? What would success look like for the Jets this year?
I think the most important thing this year is culture change. New mindset, accountability, creating a winning environment that's got to be the focus. On-field results, those might come in smaller steps.
It's not necessarily playoffs in year one.
It's possible, sure, but I wouldn't make that the main goal. I think a more realistic target is seeing real improvement on defense. Glenn's specialty. With the right additions, they could become a much tougher team to score on.
What about the offense? Can't ignore the Aaron Rodgers situation. That's a big factor.
Absolutely. Rodgers is the wild card here. If he stays, the expectations go way up. They've got to build a team that can compete for a Super Bowl. If he's traded, then it's probably a rebuilding year, maybe with a younger quarterback. Either way, Mougie's got some big decisions to make.
And some big decisions about other players on the roster, too. Garrett Wilson, their top pick from last year, he's looking like a star at wide receiver.
Wilson's a special talent. He's already shown what he can do, and he could become one of the best in the league. But he's also eligible for a contract extension, and that could get complicated. The Jets want to keep him long-term, but that's going to be expensive. And if they don't handle it right, they risk alienating a young player who's a big part of their future.
And then there's the draft. They've got the 7th pick. A chance to add another impact player.
That draft pick is crucial. They need to make it count. Do they take the best player available regardless of position, or do they go for a specific need? It's the age-old draft dilemma, and there are good arguments on both sides.
A lot to think about for a first-time GM.
It is, but it's also a huge opportunity. Mougey can really put his stamp on this team, build it the way he sees fit. The potential payoff is huge, but so is the risk.
So as we head into this crucial offseason, what should we be watching for? What are the biggest questions facing the Jets?
Well, the Aaron Rodgers situation is obviously number one. Is he staying or going? And if he goes, what do they get in return? That decision affects everything else. Then it comes down to talent acquisition, managing the roster. What's Mougey going to do in free agency? Can he find value in the draft?
And how about Glenn? How's he going to implement his defensive system? Can he get the players to buy in? Can he build that culture of accountability that's been missing for so long?
All those questions, they're key. The answers will tell us if this new era for the Jets is a real turning point, a return to relevance, or just another chapter in a long story of disappointment.
It's a fascinating time to be a Jets fan, that's for sure. Lots of excitement, lots of anticipation, but maybe a little bit of cautious optimism too.
And that's probably the right approach. Hope for the best, but be prepared for it to take time. Building a winning culture, that's not a quick fix. There are going to be bumps along the way.
Very true. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we'll be here to analyze every step of the way.
Always a pleasure to dig into the NFL with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the NFL. We'll be back soon with more analysis and breaking news.
It's going to be an interesting offseason, that's for sure. Jets always keep things interesting.
Always keeping us guessing. But let's go a little deeper, beyond the big headlines. What are some of the under-the-radar storylines you'll be watching? Those subtle moves that could end up having a big impact down the road.
One thing I'm curious about is how Mougey handles the offensive line. They've spent a lot of resources there in recent years, but it's still a bit of a question mark if they want to protect Rodgers, assuming he stays, or even if they're developing a younger quarterback, they've got to solidify that offensive line.
And with limited cap space, he might have to get creative. Maybe look for some bargains in free agency. Prioritize the O-line in the later rounds of the draft.
Exactly. It's the smart, under-the-radar moves that can really make a difference. That's where you see a GM's talent for building a roster.
Another interesting angle is Glenn's defensive scheme. He comes from a system that's all about aggression, forcing turnovers. How's that going to work with the Jets' current personnel?
Good question. They've got some talent on defense, but they haven't been consistent. Glenn's got to turn them into a cohesive unit that fits his style. Will he go for speed, athleticism, or will he want a more physical, power-based defense?
And how's that defense going to fit with the offense they're building? Are they going to be balanced, or will they lean heavily on one side of the ball?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that balance, or maybe imbalance, plays out. Ideally, you want a team that can win in different ways, but often a team's identity really comes down to its strengths. We'll get a better sense of that as they make personnel moves and as Glenn starts to implement his schemes.
So much to talk about, so much to analyze. It's a true deep dive, and we've only scratched the surface.
That's what makes the NFL so great. It's like a chess match, always adjusting, always countering. And with the Jets, you never know what's going to happen next. Keeps things exciting.
For those Jets fans out there, the diehards, what's your message to them as they head into this offseason? Lots of change, lots of uncertainty.
I'd say embrace the unknown. This is a team in transition, exciting times, but also some anxiety that's natural. It's a fresh start, a new direction. Be patient, watch closely. closely and enjoy the ride.
Good advice. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Couldn't agree more. And in the NFL, that journey is rarely a straight line. There's going to be ups and downs, twists and turns. How a team handles those challenges, that's what shows their true character.
Well said. We'll be here every step of the way, breaking it all down. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the New York Jets' new era.
Always enjoy sharing these insights with such an engaged audience.
And all of our viewers, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis and conversations about the NFL. We'll see you next time.